Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 9, Episode 33 of our what is often, but has not recently been, a weekly Q&A video.
Right.
And
what we just edited out, which you didn't hear, was our discussion about whether it should be Season 9 or Season 10.
Yeah.
And it's Season 9 for no good reason, but...
just cause.
And here we are.
No rules.
Before we get into the first question, is it worth talking a little bit about what's happened in the last few weeks that messed up our schedule so much?
Yeah, that's fair. So, I guess we were both on trips.
Yes.
And there were times where each of us was available. But
not both of us.
Not both of us was available at one time. And so a lot of it, I was on a road trip. And so for a lot of it, I was in a car with no place to film. You know, I could get Wi-Fi sometimes. I had a little bit of data, right? But I had nowhere near enough for like a long Zoom call in the middle of nowhere. Right. And there was no way I had access to Wi-Fi and a quiet space at the same time. Right. I either had a quiet space or Wi-Fi and never both.
Right. And I think because my circumstances, I was in the middle of the sea. I had data that was good on land, but not on sea. So because we were close enough sometimes that there was intermittent data.
Yeah.
I was the one that ended up doing the recaps for each week, but they had to be really stripped down because otherwise it would have been wouldn't have been able to upload for the amount of data that it took.
It would have been a little bit of a miserable experience instead of watching it go up by like 1% or 2 every time you got connected to the internet, it would be watching it go up 0%.
Yeah.
Because it would not have been able to give enough data to noticeably like improve the progress bar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you had a good time.
Yeah, you had a good time.
Mostly, I mean, aside from, I don't know how much to get into and how much people care, but you know, we had an issue with COVID. It was all like it's really interesting to people when they know us, but I think it's probably pretty boring considering we're still in the middle of a pandemic. It's year 3. We've had 2 full years and we're halfway into year 3.
Yeah.
So I guess, I don't know. Like, you know how we used to sort of place these Q&As in time by commenting on current events?
Yeah.
The problem is the current event, it's really not that current. We're talking, you know what I mean? Like it's a 3-year, a couple seasons of our Q&A.
It continues to loom large in people's minds, but there's not really much new to be said about it.
Right, and it's not much of a landmark when it's that big. Like it's a big chunk of time. It's hard to use it to place us in a particular spot. You know, there's other stuff that's happening, right? There's the war in the Ukraine that Russia is waging. There is, what else? Oh, there's the January 6 hearings for the people who rushed the American Capitol.
Kiwi farms got taken down. That was while we were on the trip.
Right.
But so we haven't talked about that yet. That was a pretty, I would say, objectively good thing to have happened in the world. But yeah. So it's interesting. Not a huge amount of news. We're just getting back into the swing of things. We're a little bit rusty.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling a little bit not sort of peak today. I don't want to say sick because I don't know if it's the threshold of being like actually ill with something.
Right.
But I'm feeling a little off today is maybe the fairest way to put it.
I should point out, because I couldn't find the original comment. So somebody had commented in the gameplay video they did with New 52 Superman and had mentioned that as an alternative for the third gear, you know, Tentu Totem Master's Death Card, the third gear was Necron Scythe.
Yeah.
I think. Was it? It might have been. I can't remember now. But it's not I agree. It's not a bad loadout, especially since we're not using a stun teammate, because what happens is when you knock somebody out, it gives you a bunch of it gives you the revive, but because New 52 Superman's the last part of his special happens after a freeze, it boosts that damage. And you can see, so we have used that because all those teams are always works in progress. If some idea comes up, and you'll notice also that it's not just that's changed. The gear load on Reverse Flash has changed too, because we don't actually need him to do a lot of basic damage. New 52 Superman can do that after he's used his passive to boost it. And it's actually more fun and more interesting to load Reverse Flash in a way that if we need to, and he's, maybe not last man standing, but that you've got somebody that's a little bit more difficult to play against because of their gear loadout, he's geared with Claw of Horus and Source Enchantress to strip all the gears off the opponent with just 2 special ones, like 2 bars of power.
Okay.
So what else were... Oh, and then, the last gear is Hyperspeed Plated Suit, only to just boost his power generation and give him a little bit unblockable if you need him to use, like, if you want to use his infinite juggle.
Nice.
Right.
Okay. Here's one thing that's kind of interesting that I wanted to mention. So the game, I've mentioned it before a couple of times, game Adios, really good game.
Right.
We talked about it more at length. One thing that I learned recently is that the developer of that game is mutuals on Twitter with Scott Lynch, and the author. And Scott Lynch regularly like comments and like replies to like his tweets and stuff. And so that was just a fun little thing because those are 2 content creators. Adios is also, I think, on sale for a higher percentage than it has been for a long time right now.
High percentage discount, you mean?
Yeah, high percentage discount. Yeah. So that this is a good time to pick it up if you've heard me talk about it before, and even if you haven't, like, look it up and grab it yourself.
Never mind, pick it up. We still have that copy to give away.
That's true, yeah. You can drop us an email at bdckr@hotmail.com if you want a Steam key for the game. So we have one of those.
That nobody's claimed.
Yeah. Multiple people have expressed interest in playing the game. And one person wanted it on Switch. But yeah, you can grab that. But then also, if you can't grab that, buying the game and supporting the dev would be pretty cool. So yeah, just thought that was kind of a little interesting. Worth mentioning maybe. So our first question of this week comes from Mustafa Almaqousi. I did my best run at that. As always, let me know how I messed up your name or how to pronounce it in the future, and I'd be happy to at least give my best effort run at it in the future. They say, hey, I found a way to get the challenge reset glitch working 100%. It's your normal patched glitch utilizing the WBID method. It's the same steps, but before launching Injustice after clearing app data, change your phone's date by 2 or 3 weeks, then log into your WBID, and you will get the challenge expired message, and the glitch will work.
So it's interesting. One of the things, so this is part of that whole history of how long I've been doing this channel. There have been multiple ways of resetting challenge. The original method we used did not require clearing your app data, and it was really just a time shift. Yeah. And when you time shifted, it was enough to trigger the completion, or sorry, the ending of the challenge. And then we went back. It's like it was brand new. All right, so that stopped working by itself. And we never went back to it because here's the thing. The problem where people don't have events show up on time, like the challenge or the Phantom Zone, we think it's a result of time shifting. Yeah. And we haven't been able to pinpoint what part of time shifting does it, how long you have to do it, whether there's something you can do to avoid that problem. But the danger of time shifting isn't worth potentially losing track of the challenges or the Phantom Zone. And so it's, I'll admit, the challenge reset method sometimes, when you log back into the game, you have to work a little bit harder to make sure that the progress on your device is what overrides the server. And so it means playing a little bit more, doing a few more things. And it's not as smooth as it used to be. It still works though, and there's no risk of losing the Phantom Zone coming when it's supposed to, or the challenge coming when it's supposed to. So I would actually advise against doing that only because of the risk of
screwing up other stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There we go. Our next comment comes from Mom Spaghetti.
It's an old one.
It's an old one.
Yeah.
But it's a good one. I think it's a good one for a couple of reasons. So they say a couple things on this one. Sorry for the long comment, and I really do appreciate you revisiting the discussion. And so I guess we're revisiting it again. We'll see if Mom Spaghetti has another long and thoughtful comment, but I'm always happy for stuff like this, I think. These are fun. So I previously had been using Statix discs with my LuxCore gear set just because it's his signature gear and it helps block. But after your last vid on the topic, I was looking around for gears. They actually said video. I don't know why I shortened it to vid. I'm making them sound... Doesn't matter. Anyways, I was looking around for gears that might help me block and increase power gen, and found that the Fourth World helmet works great. Not only is it better at helping static block than the discs, 22% block reduction versus 25%, but it provides 18% power generation. Plus, the stun on tagging can allow me to get a free special off. My original team I referenced in the video was my static build plus Arkham Knight plus any arbitrary third character with high stats. I swapped this for static with LexCorp helmet plus chest in the Fourth World helmet, plus Arkham Knight with crit/damage gear, plus Regime Green Lantern, and noticed that static had a much better job gaining power now without relying only on his passive, and my third character feels a lot less arbitrary now. You guys caused me to experiment like this, and it made my static noticing better, and I'm assuming noticeably, yeah. As for my time to complete matches, it definitely depends on who I'm up against and my mindset while I'm playing. I just enjoy and think static is a fun character, and my main concern is the win itself rather than the time to win, so I think this is a major disconnect. When I have worried about speed, like when it's crunch time at the end of a season, it just means that Arkham Knight will be the main source of damage and static will function as a tank, though such games last on average about 20 seconds or so if I had to guess. I'll also occasionally use Arkham Knight as the main damage guy when faced with a team that will be hard for static, such as Blackest Night Batman team, since my static is so fragile to unblocked attacks. I usually just swap Arkham Knight in at the start, and a few seconds later the game is over. But most of the time static will be the only character I need, and I can reliably win matches that way. Another point before I go is that my favorite game mode is Survivor, and I'm far more able to rely on opponent specials because of how fast single-player AI builds power when you hit them. Relying on that is a lot harder when the opponents hardly gain power from being hit. I think you really hit it on the nose when you said that it depends on how you can constitute a good team. For me, I'll gladly increase my average game time if it means winning more and losing less, because I feel like the devs intended for your goal to be winning matches as much as possible. But if your goal is grinding the most MP as possible, using static as my main damage guy is definitely a weird choice when the Arkham Knight on my team can get the win in a fraction of the time. The same team is valid in either case, it just means I need to swap out the job of static. Thanks for being critical, though, because the power generation thing made me seriously improve static's efficacy.
Right.
So there we go. I like this comment for a couple different reasons.
Yeah.
It goes in deep. It said, you said something to me. I tried stuff out. I thought about it, and I found stuff. Right. And that is, I think, the only... If there's a wrong way and a right way of doing things in Injustice...
Right.
That is the only right way of doing things. Is thinking about it, going, what do I want? What am I trying to do? And then just messing around, and then finding something. And this, I feel like, goes through and really gives, I think, great insight into what it's like to mess around and then find something good and go, oh, that's cool. And
and it works.
I feel like I can read the process of having an idea, talking about the idea, refining it, testing it, and then finding something that feels nice.
And we're doing it to some degree with the New 52 team, the New 52 Superman team that you're seeing, if I got the video right. It's the same idea, right? That you play it, you see what actually happens, and then you tweak the parts. So that was the basis for tweaking Reverse Flash, because he wasn't really necessary for the basic damage, and that's what we geared him for. So we threw that out and geared him to be a gear stripping specialist.
Yeah.
New 52 Superman, that was interesting too, because now that we dropped the third power generated gear and we're using Necron Scythe, you can see the difference in the technique for the fighting, where when we tag him in, do a combo right away. And what's neat is that his combo, I think people call it chain it, but I don't really know that it works like that. But you can, immediately after completion of his swipe combo, you can almost always get his special 2 unblocked. And so that works for speed, because it saves a bunch of time when we don't have to wait for the first opponent if they happen to have power. The only real danger is first opponent is Astro Harness, and we can't do our swipe combo. Modify a little bit, and that's the only reason why it's necessary still with this team to check out the gear slot for the first opponent, only to make sure they don't have Astro Harness.
Yeah, and so we're definitely experimenting too. And the other thing that I really like about this comment is the understanding of what you find fun, and specifically and purposefully seeking out fun, as opposed to just speed and efficiency. Because there is, and this is something that we talk about a lot, where it's the other thing we say, where there's no right way, no wrong way to play, but if there's a right way to play, it's experimenting. And if there's even, like, I think at a higher level, is knowing what you want to do, what you want to get out of it, what you find entertaining and enjoyable, and seeking that to the exclusion of anything else. Like, it doesn't matter what stats are optimal. It doesn't matter at all any of what else is happening in the game if you are having a good time with it and having the most fun. As long as, you know, with the exception of, like, doing something that, like, negatively impacts somebody else's experience. Like, if what fun for you in the game is I don't think there is a way to do this, but, like, for example, if it was, like, hacking into, like, other people's accounts and then deleting all of their characters out from them, that, you know, doesn't apply. But in what is almost entirely sort of a single player game where your experience and what you are doing has very little, you know, impact on the player base as a whole, or even any other individual player, right? The sort of biggest thing you can do is pick what teams other people are fighting sometimes in multiplayer. Having fun is really all you should be doing. And so I like that you also have a team that works for you no matter what you're trying to do. This is sort of your go-to team. It's like, you know, an everyday carry almost, right? Where it's got all the essentials. It's got a way of beating matches fast. It's got somebody who you like as a character and find really fun to play with. And then understanding that, like, what also matters a lot is, like, the mindset that you go into it with. Because I think that is something that when most people talk to us about Injustice in games, we don't hear a lot of. It's like, what's the best team for this? What should, you know, I do? What's, like, the optimal thing? You know, how can I improve this team?
Right, because there's something baked into that. When you say what's the optimal team, there's some baked in assumptions, which aren't true for everybody, which is what you're talking about now.
Yeah, and so then, you know, this person comes to us and says, this is who I like, and this is why I like them. I like not because it's fast. I find this better for me, and not necessarily better because it helps me win more matches, but I find this better because I enjoy it more. Yeah. And in this case, it is actually win more matches, but it's not that I win matches faster, I guess. It's not that I like this better, not because I'm accumulating resources at the fastest possible rate, but because I enjoy playing with it. And I think that is something that a lot of people sort of overlook in that this person has not at all.
Right. The one analogy I like to say is that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And the biggest problem people will run into isn't that their pace isn't fast enough, is that they give up before they get to the really good parts. And to me, the good part is playing this as a sandbox type of game. Yeah. Where you have the stuff, you mix and match, you mess around with it. And so there's the collecting part, and that's fine too, but because the collecting part is so slow, if at any point you lose your joy, then you're done for.
Yeah, it's true. Having fun for longer, that's an interesting thing. And that's kind of like, I've talked, I think, a little bit about Dark Souls before, and we had like one Dark Souls video on the channel that was just me, a compilation of all the times I died when I was playing Dark Souls 2 after I beat it. I started it again and saw if I could make a really sort of like goofy guy.
Well, that was the naked guy, right?
Yeah, and I was only using the, I think they're called castices or whatever, the fist-based like leather wraps, and so I had like very little range, and I was seeing if I could go around just punching people, which I found very sort of satisfying. But, you know, my experience with Dark Souls has always been that I get to a certain point and I get stuck and I stop having fun, and then I stop playing. And then I stop playing for a significant amount of time, and I come back like 6 months or a year or whatever later, and then I start a new character because I don't want to sort of throw myself right back in the middle of it, because then I'm rusty and bad, and at the point that I was stuck at. And then I go from the start, and all the early stuff, you sort of build this like mental map and memory for the areas, because that's one thing that Dark Souls does really well, is make memorable spaces. And then you get to the point that you were stuck at last time. And then you, most of the time for me anyways, I find that it's not as hard anymore. And I try to adopt like a little bit of a different playstyle, or try to do something a little different. And so for somebody who's not good at Dark Souls, I can have a huge amount of fun with it. And I can really, instead of sort of adopting the strategy of like, I need to do the most damage, I need to get the furthest in the game, I need to like beat the game, which is, I think, pretty clearly like the goal of the video game as a product. My goal out of it is not to beat the video game, it's to have fun with it. And so if I stop having fun, I'm not going to just bang my head against a wall over and over again until I, break through it. I'm going to put it down and I'm going to do something else with my free time. And so I think that's definitely something really sort of valuable to try to think about. It's the idea of intentionality and being intentional with how you experience stuff. And I think it's good to be intentional wherever possible, but specifically if you're doing something for fun, be intentional about having fun with it, and without stressing yourself out and worrying about that as something else to optimize.
See, that's an interesting word that you chose, because in my mind, I've always thought of that as mindfulness. But I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Where you just do it in a considered way, not only when you start, but as you're doing it. And then a lot of those questions that people ask us about what team is good, who to pick, and whatever, they answer themselves.
Yeah.
And the other related point I want to make in terms of when people say what's the best is everybody enjoys potentially different things. There's so many different combinations. Like, I can give you an example. Our favorite static team is actually one with Rebirth Raven and Hawk Girl. And it's another totally legitimate choice. But that the only common sort of thing that sort of crosses most categories is the speed, and which is why we address that so often as the one thing, because you might like static, somebody else like Arkham Knight, somebody else likes the Flashpoint team.
Yeah, but we can only speak to metrics because that's the only thing that we know is the same between people.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And I think the only place in the game where there's clear things that are the best is if you're talking about, if I want X out of my gear, which gear is the best? Because usually there is an answer for that. Normally, you can literally read in the percentages. You go, this gear has like the most abilities that are related to this.
Right.
And this is the one with like the highest percentages. Right. And sometimes there's a little bit of, well, it depends. That goes on, which is, if you're like, especially if you're looking for like a third gear to slot in, and you're like trying to just like make a specialist, you're like, well, it depends, if what percentage is your crit chance already evolved to on the character that you're using, what other, how close to 100% you want it. So there are some decisions there, but gear, I think, especially if you're looking for like a specific stat, tends to be like the only place where I can see a really sort of clear-cut answer a lot of times. Like, I have a specialist, what gear do I want? It's like, 10-2 Totem Master's Death card, easy. Right. I want power generation, what gear is best for power generation? And you can just look through the gears and see, which one has the biggest numbers.
Right. And
it's not very hard to give that kind of recommendation.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, is there anything else you want to talk about for this? Or is
not for that question. I think maybe we're not going to do a long video, even though we've been away for a while, but maybe we'll do
at least one more.
Yeah,
well, maybe two, depends on how long these take. So, Blue Whale says, obviously not going to happen, but if there was a fourth gear slot added, how do you think it would change the strategy in online play? I think there's a few things that would change, like being able to have Tantu Totem, Master's Death Card, Astro Harness, and Power Gen increase like Heart of Darkness, so it can make matches faster, but it also makes an extra defensive slot. So if you have Batman, or Batman Ninja Helmet, I see BN and I'm always like Black as Night.
So you could have Batman
Ninja Helmet, Killer Croc, Companion, what's his second C again?
It should be Companion Gear.
Companion Gear.
Is it Killer Croc? No, it's the teeth, whatever, I can't remember now.
Is it two C's? It's Killer Croc CC and I don't know what it stands for.
Because there's a Killer Croc gear, and then there's a Killer Croc companion gear that's a Suicide Squad set. I think this is probably, for defensive, it'd be the Killer Croc companion gear.
Yeah. I got to that now. I'm stuck on the acronyms today. It's been a while. Can you tell it's been a while? Gingold Soda and something else like Astro Harness. It would also mean you could use an additional basic attack damage increased gear. What do you guys think?
So it's an interesting thought experiment. And the difficulty is because it always feels like you're one gear slot away from doing exactly what you want. Yeah. Right? I think that's good game design because you don't want to necessarily have... Oh, you know what it makes me think of? Okay, I'll get to it after. But the game design is that there's got to be some sort of give and take, because if it's just so easy to pick something like, the super duper cheat mode... Yeah. I don't feel like it's that fun anymore. Yeah, trade-offs are a really important and satisfying part of game design, where you want to feel like, I wish I could do both of these things, but I have to pick one or the other. That can be really cool. Right. There's a lot of games where I like, especially when they have like an upgrade tree, and you can pick either one thing or another thing. Right. And you never... sometimes even letting people swap and recombine and stuff, but never having access to both of those things at once. I think about like XCOM, where you have to pick one of those abilities and you don't get to have a person fully kitted out with everything. And it makes people's games distinct in a meaningful way. It makes the choices that you make to build out your characters unique, and so you can easily have like a qualitatively different character based off of how you gear them. Because you have to make a ideological choice when you do it. And the more gears, if you go sort of extended, if the more gear slots you had, if you had 10 gear slots, then it no longer becomes something that you actually have to decide. You just drop everything that you got on them. Every
character needs to be something, and no character can be everything.
All right. So this is what okay, so I'm going to get into it because I've got notes on the original question. This is a thought that just occurred to me now. There's a book called The Rune Lords by David Farland. And David Farland, I think, was a pseudonym, or he had another pseudonym that was also prominent, and I can't remember the name, but he passed away very recently. And the book I want to point out, though, Rune Lords, what was interesting was it was a magic system where these warriors, Rune Lords, would have magic based on people that gave them their power. And it's been a while since I read it, so my memory for it is kind of foggy. But what was cool
so this is like a really bad version of like a Wikipedia synopsis
or
something.
But the reason why it's connected, and I remember being a pretty cool story, I've got it on my shelf, I should revisit it, is that they had this entourage, and that's not really the right word, it's not really an entourage, but they had these people that basically became completely disabled because they gave their ability to this Rune Lord to make that Rune Lord more powerful. So you have this one Rune Lord that's super powerful in battle and is like a super warrior, a superhero, but they're tied to all these other people that are weak and vulnerable. So that the job then becomes protecting all these other people, because the way to get to the Rune Lord is by attacking these people that are giving him his power. So it's interesting like that. It just, I don't even know why I was thinking about it, because maybe just thinking about all the gear slots, so that you're talking about how you could just load up one guy with everything. Yeah. And then, I mean, that's sort of the theory that a lot of people are using now. Not really, but it feels superficially like it, where they have one team where there's one guy that's really good and a couple that are really weak. And so once you knock out the really weak guys, what you take away from the strong guy
is the ability to swap.
Yeah, and a lot of like the most important gear, Tantu Totem, is based entirely on being able to tag in. Yeah. So at the point where you've lost, like you've been unable to knock out the opponent in front of you, you've lost that regaining your power ability.
Part of your sort of strength has been cut out from under you a little bit.
Right, and then they knock out your little weakling teammates. Yeah. I don't know. It's just funny. Like I don't know why it occurred to me like that.
I'm not exactly sure why it occurred to you either. Well, that's okay.
Okay, so the original question was, all right, fourth gear slot. So here's the thing. The same way you can make yourself better, others can do that same thing too. Yeah. So the only way a fourth gear slot separates your team from your opponent's team is if you do a better job of planning the synergy of the abilities of the different gears.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is that right now, when you're playing well and you've got a thoughtful team and you have access to all sort of the stuff you want, it's not that hard to make a team that can win pretty fast and pretty consistently, right. Given enough sort of, or a minimum threshold of sort of skill on the part of the person playing the team. Right. Because obviously, if you bring in a brand new player, they're probably not going to be nearly as good at making the most of the team that's in front of them. Right. So it's already not that hard. And I'm not like trying to trivialize it either, because it takes a while to get there and there is a certain amount of practice, but like, especially if you're even if you're early and don't have access to resources the same way, if you invest more in gears than other stuff for whatever level you're playing at, if you have sort of gear that outpaces it, it's already pretty easy at, I think, most levels of gameplay, no matter how far you are in the game, to make a team that could win pretty consistently and in not too long.
Well, and I think that's why the game is built so well, because the time it takes you to develop your gear and the chance you have to practice with it, that teaches you what you need to know. Yeah. So a lot of those people who are asking, well, which player should I use? Which gear should I use? The problem is they're asking the wrong thing because they're coming at the game from the wrong way. It shouldn't be which gear should I use or what should I do. It's if somebody's really inexperienced and hasn't cheated their way to a bunch of resources or borrowed somebody's account.
It's what do I have?
It's, well, yeah, where should I go? For all the different options now, like, because everything's going to take me so long to maximize. Which gear should I prioritize? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's actually more honest and a legitimate question compared to, okay, so I've got all this stuff. I've been playing for a while. I've accumulated all this stuff. What should I use? a dishonesty there, because if you've got it, if you've accumulated it, you already know.
Well, I don't know if there's a dishonesty there. I think some people play around with stuff, and maybe I think it depends on if it clicks for you or not. I think there's some people who might have played and earned stuff, and then it never sort of clicks, like, what's an optimal team? And if you're just sort of doing the thing where you're messing around and playing with people and grinding up, I think you have a naturally very systematic way of, like, looking at things. Yeah. And so I think some people might play the game and not absorb that same information, or not have it in the same sort of... maybe the same access and ability to use it how you do. And so they might be going, okay, well, I've done a bunch of stuff where I don't care about optimization. I've sort of just farted around and played and have fun. If I do, can you sort of lend me your brain to do it? So
let me put it another way then. If I'm trying to unpack all these assumptions that I've got, my one assumption that I haven't stated explicitly is that because it is such a marathon, because you have to put in that so much time to do it, either you've burnt yourself out or you found some way to make it interesting enough. And it's hard to make it interesting without the kind of variety that comes with just trying the different things that you've got. If you're accumulating all these gears and you're not using them, the time that it takes to play to that level, I think the majority of people would have burnt themselves out if they weren't doing it mindfully or with an intentionality to actually get better or make sort of optimizations that make it the most fun or the quickest to play. Yeah, so that's fair. Yeah, so I wouldn't say universally it's people who have like hacked or like whatever, or who aren't engaging, with the game in the right way. But yeah, I think there's definitely, if somebody says like, I have literally everything and I have no clue where to start, it doesn't seem like that person has earned literally everything, or if they have, it's been in a way that's very different. It's very outside of our own experiences. So it's hard we don't really have insight into that person's state, but it's hard to understand what that would be. Right. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's probably a good place to end it for the week. We got half an hour here. Thank you to everybody who watched. Thanks for, welcoming us back. Man, I am stumbling over my words a little bit today. I decided not to film yesterday because I was even more tired. Yeah. So this is me a little bit more peak form. So I'm glad we didn't make the decision to film a day early, because I think I would have been a little bit out of it. I think as an entertainment product, if we're asking people to listen to it, for how entertaining I think our average video is, this would drop well below the threshold. That would have dropped well below the threshold of what I would have wanted to put out into the world. But anyways, thank you so much for watching our first week back and bearing with us in a little while. I think I can speak for both of us when I say it feels a little nice to be back and filming. Oh my gosh. It's good. For not just the filming reasons, but it is so... I'm not a traveler. And it is so nice to be home in my own bed each night and having all the resources that I spent a lifetime accumulating at hand. Like, I don't need it all. You make it sound like you're a dragon. Like you came back to sit on your hoard. Yeah. It feels like that sometimes, but what traveling really brings into stark relief the difference between being somewhere else where the main language is not English, where the main language is not something that I speak, where the rules are different, the culture is different, and I don't have all the tools that I don't use them all the time, but I know where stuff is. I've got access to things that can, like basically, I don't want to say emergency, but when things change and something happens, I can deal with it. Everything that you have prepped for, if you've prepped for a situation, is the tools to deal with it are here. Right. It's very situation specific and very location specific. Yeah. So there we go. It is. So it's nice to be back, but we wanted to give shout outs to some folks. I'd like to give a shout out to Eliza, pumpkin pie producer Caton. She'd be making pumpkin pie and all that. This shout out was brought to you by October in the season, I guess. It's pumpkin season. They're sort of out and about. They're around. Keep an eye out for them. All kinds of gourds. So there we go. And we'd also like to give a huge thank you to all the lovely folks who support us on Patreon. That would be Bombo Ben and Consul Peasant and Edwoon at the top tier last word. Sinemac and Mohammed Albshaiti at Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, Eddydoo, and Hoshi 127 at the credited level, and Chris Wolf, Scarlett Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E at the gratitude level.
Thank you so much for your support, and thanks so much to all of you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.